As I said, we go back, and I think the first connection that we have, which would be going on 4 years ago, I took my daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, to see her first concert, which was Genesis in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that was November 20th of 2021. And you were there at that fateful concert, as you have been to many Genesis and Phil concerts on that tour and others as well. You're very fortunate to have seen him as many times as you have. I was thrilled to have my daughter when Genesis was her favorite band in the world, to have her at that show and for that to be her first concert experience ever. And that was one of the most amazing nights of my life. And for Christmas that year for her, I composed a scrapbook of different pictures from that show. And thanks to the wonderful photographs that you took, I was able to give Bella a photograph that introduced every number in that show. So thank you for making that possible for me.
Oh, I'm so grateful. I remember when you reached out to me, and it was just my pleasure to, give you permission to use the photos. And I was so grateful to be able to take them, being able to have a seat there up front with Phil. And
Yes.
extraordinary photos of him. I'm actually working on some photo books that for myself that will chronicle the various shows. I did 11 shows on that tour, and so I'll do chunks of 2 or 3 shows per book, and it'll be, a couple volumes that I have to commemorate. And as I put it together, I have to take breaks here and there because I have other things that are keeping me busy. But I was just looking back on them a couple of weeks ago, and the pictures are just extraordinary. And I haven't actually looked at the project in probably 6 or 8 months. So this is going to inspire me to get back to it. But I had been looking for a specific photo, and I just was blown away at the actual, how beautiful the lighting is. Genesis is a pioneer. They sort of financed Vari-Lights, and they used to use those 747 lights back in the day before Vari-Lights from the airplanes to make an impact. And so they've always pioneered that kind of technology, and the lights and the production values on that Genesis show were incredible. And the audience response, it didn't matter that Phil was seated and that, maybe his voice wasn't as strong as it was when he was 30, because the audience was in the palm of his hand, and the people love him so much. And it made this combined experience that we all had, that were in the building, right? Mm-hmm. So special. And Bella is so fortunate to have experienced that alone, just on its own, but then with her dad. I mean, it's just wonderful, and I'm so happy that the pictures are going to be in her life forever. It's great.
Absolutely. Well, I have been fortunate enough to see Phil several times, and him being seated was of no consequence to me because, as you know, I was born with cerebral palsy and have been in a wheelchair all my life, so I was also seated for the entire show. So I didn't see anything wrong with that, and I don't, I saw him on the Not Dead Yet tour when he came to Charlotte, to that particular venue in 2019 where we saw Genesis, and I saw him in Washington, D.C. on that tour. And when Emily, my wife of 15 years, and I were engaged, we spent all of my money and more besides, and had my best friend at the time drive us to New York. And I proposed to her on the night that we went to the Roseland Ballroom to see him do the Motown show.
Yeah.
So those are the only 4 times I've gotten to see Phil, but I feel very fortunate to be a part of those extraordinary evenings. And despite his age and so-called disabilities, I think nothing was lost in terms of his voice. I would give anything to have half as good a voice as he has now. So
it's so funny that he is so self-deprecating
mm-hmm.
and genuinely doesn't feel that his voice, I've not personally talked with him about it, but some of the folks I interviewed that I've talked with, since then I've become friends with, tell me that Phil is actually doesn't think he has a great voice, and he gets sort of sensitive about things, and I think one of the things was that he admires Michael Bolton's voice and wishes he could sing like Michael Bolton. Now, I don't know if I'm remembering it correctly, so, Phil, if you're listening,
yeah.
I'm wrong, sorry, but I'm only teasing. But,
yeah.
It's interesting. I think sometimes the people who have the most talent and who have the biggest gifts don't realize it, and I think Phil is definitely one of those people.
Because if I had a choice if a genie popped out of a lamp and said, I'm going to give you a choice, you can either sound like Phil Collins or you can sound like Michael Bolton. Which one do you think I'm going to choose? Which one do I think most people would choose? And that would, of course, be Phil.
5-year-old child who was so upset that his mom didn't take him to the show. You actually share something with one of Phil's children, and that is his oldest daughter, Jolie. And when and Jill left the house that day on July 13th, they took Jolie and baby Simon to June, Phil's mother's home, and dropped the kids off. They could go and do this globe hopping, 2-concert show day. And I think I've heard Phil say that to this day, Jolie is still mad at him because she was a teenager at the time, and she wanted to see, the guys in Duran Duran and the different groups, and she wanted her dad to take her there, and she was like, and gives him a hard time, I think, still even today. So that is something you share with her.
Let me ask you really quickly, point blank, have you met Phil Collins?
I have not had the pleasure of meeting him. When I first saw I had my first Genesis show was 1986 at the LA Forum in October on the Invisible Touch tour. And then I saw different shows here and there over the years. It just wasn't, I just didn't have the opportunity. And then I would have on the Last Domino tour probably, and probably on the Not Dead Yet tour as well. But I just didn't have, it wasn't the right timing, right? And then on the Not Dead Yet tour, due to COVID, and so forth, they weren't seeing anybody. But I did get to meet every other person on the in the group. I mean, I got a great photo with Mike and Tony, and with Steve Jones, Pud, and just all sorts of, the various band. Daryl was so nice to me and such a sweet man, and so many people in their operation, even Tony Smith, who I was really terrified because I have seen Come Rain or Shine.
Exactly.
So I just was like real quick to say hi to him. So but I have not. But I hope to today.
You should. If anybody deserves to, other than yours truly, it is you, my friend.
I love the notion, and Phil will talk about this a lot, when there was the criticism that Phil Collins ruined Genesis, these Genesis fans who say that, which is preposterous. Phil will say, I'm not sure if you actually know Tony Banks, but Tony Banks is not going to do anything in Genesis that he doesn't want to be done in Genesis. So Invisible Touch wouldn't have been made unless Tony wanted it to be made. So people who say that Phil ruined Genesis is just not even criticism that's anywhere close to accurate. And they have to evolve anyway. They're not going to sit and play Supper's Ready for 40 years. So,
and nobody would know. I mean, the reason I know Genesis is because of Phil Collins. Being born in 1985, he was the center of the music world at that time, and I think 90% of the people who know Genesis know them, particularly if you're in America, you know them because of Phil Collins. I mean, because of his commercial success, he brought Genesis with him. I don't think he necessarily intended to do that, nor did he refrain from it, but it just happened that way, and it brought them into a commercial pop world, which I'm very grateful for because they became my favorite band. And I know why I didn't get to. I will always regret never going to Washington D.C. to see them, thinking it was too much money. I didn't have that much money and enough gas to put in my big lift-equipped van to drive 6 hours to Washington, D.C. I ended up paying twice that to go see them when they came to Charlotte. But I know now why, because God said, Genesis shalt come to Charlotte so Zach and Bella can see them together. And the only time they ever played in Charlotte, North Carolina, Bella and I and Emily, we were there. And you can't put a price on that.
I mean, it does seem like it's fate. And I always thought it was so strange that they played in, first of all, just in Charlotte in general. Not that, it's just not a major market, and they only played so few cities on the last Domino tour. But then they also played Raleigh, which was to play two shows. I mean, Charlotte and Raleigh were not the cities that you would have assumed. You know, you think Tampa or Atlanta. You know, it was just a very interesting thing, and definitely meant to be for your family. That's for sure.
And and they'd never played Charlotte before. Certainly never will again. And they gave the Spectrum Center in Charlotte their first sellout since the pandemic. So. Yeah. They don't know it, but they can thank me and Bella for that. We willed it to happen, and I know, God was working that out for Bella, or for me, or for whoever. But that moment that we shared together is one of the greatest of all three of our lives. And I've seen many, many shows, and including Mr. Collins several times, and nothing comes close to that.
Really special.
Yeah, Genesis.
Gosh, these people they're really special. I feel lucky to have gotten to meet some of these folks. I have met Peter, but it was many years ago, and it was just kind of a meet and greet thing. But he's always is what I hear. But,
well, let me ask you this. I'm doing this one for Bella. You've met Tony. Is he a nice guy?
He's lovely.
Is he?
You know, he's quintessentially British. So he's Tony Banks. He's quiet. He smiles. You know, we were. It was at a restaurant. I had just gotten into town in England. I'd flown into Heathrow and taken the train to Leeds, and the restaurant at my hotel is where they happened to be having dinner.
Right.
And anyway, I don't know if the restaurant had been kind of closed or what, but it was a little bit late, and they let me go down and eat, and I didn't know that the guys were there, and no one told me. But anyway, that's how it was. So when they were done eating, I went over and just asked if I could have a quick hello, and they invited me to sit down, and they were so gracious. And I sat there at the table. Daryl was next to me, and Tony and Mike were across from me, and so many other people were there at the table. Phil and Nicholas were not there, but everybody else on the tour was. And I didn't really meet lots of the other people at that time, but they were very sweet. And I was actually going to get up very quickly because I didn't want to impose, although they were completely done eating and many people were getting up to leave. But they invited me to stay for a few minutes, and I spoke with Daryl for about 15 minutes, and we spoke about the passing of my husband. My husband passed away in April of 21 from a late-stage diagnosis of colon cancer. He was just 58 years old when he died. He was diagnosed March 1st and just 7 weeks later passed. So he didn't suffer too long, but it was really horrible. And I knew that Daryl, his wife, had been suffering with cancer, and she was in remission. And then I had heard from a friend of mine who is not related to Genesis but happens to know Leland Sklar, and I had heard that her cancer was back, and I don't know that it was public at the time. It is public now. And we spoke about that, and I asked him, how did he feel having to come out on tour while his wife was battling again, and she had lots of support at home, and they had a secondary guitar player at the ready if necessary, if Daryl felt that, she needed him. And I think everything's turned out okay. I don't know exactly how she is today, but it was a very heartfelt conversation, and very genuine, very real. And I was very grateful because I felt like it was one of the first times I had a chance to talk with somebody else who had suffered the loss, or not the loss, she didn't pass, but what it's like to have a spouse with cancer. I have since gotten to meet quite a few different people, some of whom have become best friends of mine, who lost spouses to cancer. And it's a club that I don't want anybody to be in, but it's a club that I'm grateful to have the support that I had and the people that I met. And Daryl was a significant person at the time to talk with me about it. So it was a beautiful thing.
Rodney was initially a bigger Phil fan than you. Is that correct?
I think, Rodney's 7 years older, so he got to see everybody at the prime. I was just like not quite old enough to see Barry, right? Or whatever kind of thing. So,
but Phil was like an idol to him, though, you said it.
Yeah, absolutely. He just loved, there's certain things, it's so crazy that he would do that I have since realized are Phil Collins. The main one is in the 1985 No Ticket Required concert, Phil is singing Take Me Home. And he goes, sleeping when it's night, right? Working in the daytime, sleeping when it's night. And it sleeping when it's night, just the way he does it. My husband used to go, I'm sleepy time. And I heard my husband saying it as Phil was singing it. And I never realized that was what it was from. And there's a couple other Phil Collins isms that my husband would say that I just never thought about, that, oh my gosh, that's, So yeah, I think it was funny. They were the same size. I actually own the tuxedo that Phil wore to the 1986 Grammys. And it's an incredible piece that I got from probably the world's largest collector of Phil Collins memorabilia, and that's my friend Leonidas Dikopoulos. Leonidas got this the tuxedo from somebody who I don't know if I could share, public. He purchased it from somebody who had worked for the family. That was given apparently when there was a closet clean out that was taking place. Jill and Phil were, I think, quite charitable, and this fellow and his gal had a couple kids, and the young man was going to be growing up, and the suits would be helpful, right? I guess there's a tuxedo and another suit. And anyway, my husband, it turns out they were the same suit size, 42 short with a 33 waist and a 29 inseam. That's the measurements. That was my husband's measurements.
Oh gosh, she's tiny.
Yeah. And anyway, so I had to get a special mannequin to fit it. And so the pictures that I recently shared them for the first time. I hadn't shared them before, but the bow tie and tuxedo shirt are my husband's, and the suit is Phil's, and it's on display in my home, and it's a beautiful thing. So he loved him, he idolized him, a lot in common. Phil was a successful guy who wasn't 6 feet tall, right? So my husband loved that. Right.
I agree with you completely that it is a gross oversight. I'm much more of a cynical person, I suppose, than you are, and it would not surprise me if it was not a deliberate oversight that he is not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't know who are the powers that be. I know nothing about it, but I just think that the press in general is particularly jaded about Phil Collins, and the people that be are, the fact that Eminem is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I'm not singling out Eminem, but the fact that there are certain members of the music world that are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and yet Phil Collins has been eligible for years and is not inducted. What I'm afraid will happen is the same that happened to another one of my favorites, and that's Dusty Springfield.
Yes.
She was inducted 2 weeks after she died. So it's like when Phil does pass away, everybody's going to realize all of a sudden what a great artist he was, and then he's going to get every accolade out there, and he's not going to be here to receive it, and that will be the ultimate slap in the face, and that's what you're trying to prevent with this campaign, and.
Drives me when I'm exhausted and and it's time on a Sunday evening to do my welcome post, which I do religiously, right? It drives me because it will break my heart if that happens. George Michael was inducted, and I'm not saying that George isn't worthy. I think George Michael is an underrated genius, and I'm so that he was recognized. But I feel like he was recognized because
because he died,
right? So. I don't want that fate for Phil Collins. Phil Collins' significant contribution to music as a solo artist is so tremendous. He has influenced generation after generation that has come after him. The music that he made, In the Air Tonight alone, qualifies him to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because of its it's just everywhere all the time. It is a massive changer for music. And then in the 80s, the way... one of the people I interviewed, there are several. I interviewed many people in Phil's, universe. One of the people that had some really great insight was my dear friend Harry Kim, and I asked Harry, "What is it about Phil? Why do people love him so much? Why did he have the success?" And Harry said he's able to write music that touches people's hearts. That and that's it. That's what music does in and of itself. And Phil. And Harry also explained to me, because Harry's a musician, that Phil changed the way pop songs were written in the 80s. There is a certain way that Phil Collins wrote a song, and it is now the way that pop songs are written. That wasn't the case before Phil Collins, and people don't realize it, and they've got to realize it, and that is my mission. So a post called Did You Know, where I will talk about things like that, or the album, break down the albums, what inspired him, what's on there, what musicians played with Phil. Phil produced Eric Clapton and Robert Plant and Howard Jones and Adam Ant and Frida. The only big hit Frida ever had, Something Going On, it was Phil Collins produced. Howard Jones' song, No One Is to Blame, I think it was one of his songs.
Yes, No One Is to Blame is the song.
Yeah, it tanked, and then Howard Jones worked with Phil on, I think, a Princess Trust event. Said, "Hey, will you help me? Because I know this song has legs, right?" Phil produced it, and it became a massive hit.
Howard's biggest song, and I'm a big Howard fan, by the way. Everlasting Love is one of my favorites.
Brilliant song. I agree. Howard Jones is actually my hero when I was in high school. Howard Jones and Tears for Fears and Depeche, all those bands. But Phil has been eligible for 19 years. You're eligible 25 years after the release of your first work, right? And so as a solo artist, February of 1981 is when he became eligible.
Right.
I'm sorry. He released his first solo music, and so 25 years later he became eligible. That was 19 years ago that he became eligible. The condition that his drop foot has caused, the crumbling vertebra, the pain that he's in, for him to come out and go on tour and do what he did, I think is a person of so much conviction and love of his fans, because like I said, he didn't have to do it, and that tour and the response the fans gave him made me so emotional and made me say, I have to right this wrong. I have to make sure that every person who's ever talked crap about Phil Collins, saying he ruined Genesis or that his music is sappy or whatever, I am going to make it my personal mission to right that wrong. And that is what my campaign does. And then Live Aid too. And who am I? I'm just a person. I don't get to right any wrongs, right? But I'm trying. When I first started the campaign, people would say, do you want to meet Phil? Do you want to meet Phil? And would I love to meet him? Of course. But my feelings about all of that have changed and evolved because I have been able to form actual real life friendships with some of the people most. through that, these are famous people in some cases, right?
Right.
And they're people that I might, call a friend who I might talk on the phone with a couple times a week, or have Thanksgiving with. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying those specific things, but actual friends. And feelings have changed about how I think about Phil. I don't think of him as a deity anymore, right? I mean, I used to sort of. But so my thoughts and my answers are different today than they were when I first started the campaign.
Right.
But one thing that has not ever changed, and is that I would love to be his quote unquote date, to walk on the red carpet, because for me, and it's going to make me cry, and I'll try not to cry again, but it would be like the triumph, like I did this, and here I am to prove it. Like, here's Phil, guys, the fans. I did this for you guys, the fans, and I did it because, Phil deserves to be recognized. Right. And it would be my greatest feeling in the whole world. And, it'd just be amazing.
I believe that he is more than overdue for Kennedy Center Honors, which is the biggest honor given to entertainers in America. But I've seen people that receive it, a couple of them, and I'm going, are you kidding me? But this year, one of my favorites was finally voted in. That was Bonnie Raitt, and I was thrilled to see her get hers in there. And I think that maybe a campaign for that, which is in the event that a president awards you with this honor, and and I think that whenever I get a fan vote and they say, who do you think should get a Kennedy Center honor, as many times and as often as I could, I've said Phil Collins.
Because there's people who believe that he should receive an OBE, an Order of British Knighthood. But what many people don't realize is that Phil actually was awarded with a very prestigious knighthood. It's called the LVO.
Yep, Lieutenant of Victorian Order. Yep.
Right, and that particular knighthood is actually very, very prestigious, because it is awarded for personal service to the monarch. So Queen Elizabeth II awarded it to Phil Collins for his personal service to the monarch, to her, and I believe that it was in service actually to the Prince's Trust.
The Prince's Trust. And he was great friends with the current King of England, I believe. He mentions him quite frequently in his autobiography. So
Yes, and Phil was a trustee for the Prince's Trust, and it's a very prestigious, very, a role with a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of fiduciary responsibility, and it's something that Phil took very seriously, and he was richly recognized by Queen Elizabeth II. And so he is, in fact, with a knighthood. It is not the order of Victorian Order. They don't have the Sir thing, and anyway, but that is something that a lot of people wish that Phil was given as well. Is that OBE, the one that carries the Sir. But
to me, he'll always be Sir Phil. So, well, lots of love to you, and God bless you for what you're doing, and thank you for giving me your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for talking with me today, and I'll do it again anytime you need me to.
Well, I hope you've had a chance to say what you want to say with this, because, like I said, I do talk a lot too, so I hope...
I like the opportunity to just talk about Phil and share my stories, and so we did that today, and that's beautiful, and thank you. It's good.
Thank you. And we are